The mining drill on Europa had been making the same grinding noise for 3 hours when Dr. Alex Reed finally looked up from his microscope. The ice samples from the moon's subsurface ocean contained something extraordinary, but now none of that mattered. Every screen in the research station showed the same impossible sight floating above. Earth's blue marble, ships the size of mountains hung in the void like silver tears frozen against the black. They moved without sound or flame, defying every law of physics Alex had spent his life studying. The vessels seemed to shimmer and bend light around their hulls as if reality itself wasn't quite sure they existed. "Alex, you need to see this broadcast," Nina called from the communications bay. Her voice carried a tremor he'd never heard before. The main display switched to Earth's emergency networks. Every channel showed the same feed of a being that looked like humanity's dreams of angels made real, tall and graceful with skin that glowed like moonlight on water. The creature spoke in a voice that seemed to reach directly into the listener's mind. "The children of Terra," the being said. And somehow Alex heard the words in perfect English while Nina gasped beside him in what sounded like Spanish. "We are the Aetheri, the gardeners of wisdom, the shepherds of countless worlds across this galaxy. For eons beyond your counting, we have watched civilizations grow from primitive tool users to star-crossing peoples. We have guided them through the darkness of ignorance into the light of true understanding." The being's eyes held depths that seemed older than Earth's sun. When it smiled, Alex felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest despite being millions of miles away. "Your species stands now at the threshold between animal existence and divine ascension. Wars poison your beautiful world. Hunger stalks your cities while abundance rots in distant lands. Disease claims those who should live for centuries in peace and joy. Death takes even your wisest before they can share their knowledge with the young." Alex found himself leaning forward, drawn by words that promised solutions to every human suffering he'd ever witnessed. "We offer you freedom from these ancient chains. Accept our guidance, and your children will know a world without want or fear. Your scientists will unlock mysteries that have puzzled you for millennia. Your artists will create beauty beyond current imagination. Your philosophers will touch the very mind of the universe itself." The camera pulled back to show more Aetheri standing in perfect formation behind their speaker. Each one radiated the same impossible beauty and serene confidence. "We have lifted 47 civilizations to this same glory. The Zentari now craft suns to warm barren worlds. The Malari have learned to speak with the quantum foam that builds reality. The Vashti dance between dimensions like children playing in summer rain." Nina gripped Alex's arm. "They're really offering to save us," she whispered, but something cold crawled up Alex's spine as he watched the beings' perfect faces. Their expressions never changed, never showed even the smallest flicker of uncertainty or spontaneous emotion. They looked like actors playing roles they'd performed 1,000 times before. "The choice is yours alone," the lead Aetheri continued. "We force nothing upon any species. But know that this offer comes rarely in the life of any world. Those civilizations that reject our guidance must find their own path through the darkness ahead. Few survive the trials that await young races in this hostile galaxy." The broadcast shifted to show views of Earth from orbit. The planet looked small and fragile, surrounded by the massive alien ships. The message was clear without being spoken. "Your leaders may contact us through the frequencies we are now transmitting to every communications array on your worlds. We will wait precisely 72 of your hours for your answer. After that time, we will depart, and your species will face whatever destiny you choose for yourselves." The transmission ended, leaving the research station in absolute silence, except for the eternal grinding of the mining equipment. "This is incredible," Nina said, her eyes bright with excitement. "They're offering us everything we've ever dreamed of. No more wars, no more death, no more struggling just to survive." Alex stared at the dark screen where the Aetheri had appeared. "Did you notice they never actually explained what accepting their guidance would mean? What would they want from us in return? Maybe they don't want anything. Maybe they're just that advanced, that generous." Nothing is free, Nina. Not in physics, not in biology, not in politics. Everything has a cost. The next 3 days passed in a blur of emergency broadcasts and global debates. World leaders held emergency sessions while crowds gathered in every major city either to pray for salvation or protest against surrendering human independence. Dr. Reed threw himself into analyzing every fragment of data about the alien ships. Their energy signatures defied classification. Their materials showed properties that shouldn't exist according to known science. Most disturbing of all, deep space monitoring stations detected no trace of how the vessels had arrived, as if they'd simply materialized from nothing. On the final day, the announcement came from the United Nations. President Martinez spoke for the assembled world leaders with tears streaming down her face. After careful consideration and consultation with our finest minds, humanity accepts the generous offer of guidance from the Ether. We surrender our weapons, our conflicts, and our fears to beings who have successfully shepherded 47 other civilizations to peace and prosperity. The response was immediate. Every ethery ship began to glow like small suns as they descended through Earth's atmosphere. The beings that emerged moved like living light, their every gesture graceful beyond human achievement. High Divinity Luxon, as the lead ethery introduced himself, touched down in New York first. The crowds that had gathered to witness history fell to their knees without being asked, overwhelmed by presence that seemed to radiate pure divine authority. "Rise, children," Luxon said, his voice carrying clearly across the vast plaza despite speaking barely above a whisper. "Gods do not require kneeling from those they love. We come as teachers, not masters." But Alex noticed that despite Luxon's words, the crowd remained on their knees with expressions of absolute devotion replacing their earlier uncertainty. Something in the ethery's presence had changed them in a way that looked almost like worship. Within hours, similar scenes played out across every continent. The ethery established themselves in carefully chosen locations, always near centers of government or communication. They spoke of love and guidance while their ships took positions above every major population center. Nina found Alex standing at the observation port, staring out at Europa's frozen surface. "You should be celebrating," she said. "Humanity just took its greatest step forward. Or its last step as a free species," Alex replied quietly. The ethery had come as humanity's saviors. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that Earth had just welcomed its conquerors with open arms. 6 months after the ethery arrival, Captain Emma Stone watched her soldiers practice ceremonial drills in the courtyard below. They moved with perfect synchronization, their faces blank and peaceful as they performed routines that served no military purpose. The sight made her stomach twist with an anger she wasn't supposed to feel anymore. The transformation of human civilization had happened faster than anyone thought possible. Diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia simply disappeared overnight when the ethery deployed their medical pods. Cancer, heart disease, even the common cold became memories as their technology rebuilt damaged cells with impossible precision. Hunger ended when the ethery food synthesizers began operating in every city. The machines could create any meal, from basic elements, producing perfect nutrition tailored to each individual's needs. No one went without, and the taste was flawless. Crime dropped to nearly zero under what the ethery called divine observation. Sensors throughout every settlement monitored human behavior and intervened before violence could occur. Their enforcement was gentle but absolute, using sonic fields to calm aggressive thoughts before they could become actions. Emma had watched her military become obsolete within weeks. The ethery explained that weapons were tools of fear, and fear had no place in a perfected society. Her soldiers turned in their guns and ammunition to be recycled into materials for the construction of magnificent temples that rose in every major city. The temples were works of art, beyond human imagination, crystalline spires that caught sunlight and transformed it into displays of colored light that danced across their surfaces like living rainbows. Inside, the ethery offered what they called blessings to any human who desired them. Emma had refused the blessing when her turn came, claiming she needed to maintain her military readiness even in peacetime. High Divinity Luxon had smiled with understanding and marked her file for later consideration. Those who received the blessings returned changed. They moved with the same peaceful certainty as the Aetheri themselves, their faces showing constant mild contentment. They spoke of feeling connected to something greater than themselves and expressed gratitude for being freed from the burden of negative emotions. Dr. Alex Reed contacted Emma through one of the few remaining unsecured communication channels. He had continued his research on Europa Station, officially studying how to improve human biology according to Aetheri specifications. But his real work involved analyzing tissue samples from blessed humans that Nina smuggled to him. The neural implants aren't just suppressing aggression, Alex explained during their encrypted conversation. They're rewriting fundamental brain patterns. The blessed humans showed decreased activity in areas responsible for creative thinking, pattern recognition, and long-term planning. They're becoming intellectually docile. Emma studied her transformed soldiers through her office window. They seem happy enough. Cattle in a pasture seem happy too. That doesn't mean they're free. What do you want me to do about it? The whole world thinks the Aetheri are saviors. Anyone who suggests otherwise gets marked for additional counseling sessions. Alex's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. There are others who share our concerns. People in positions where they could make a difference if they worked together. Emma knew she was taking an enormous risk, but the sight of her hollow-eyed soldiers performing their meaningless drills decided her. Tell me more. The resistance began small and careful. Dr. James Park, a neuroscientist who had vanished from public view rather than submit to Aetheri evaluation, had established a network of individuals who had avoided the blessing process. They met in abandoned subway tunnels and decommissioned industrial sites where divine observation couldn't reach. The first meeting Emma attended took place in an old mining facility beneath the city. 12 people sat in a circle lit by battery-powered lanterns, their faces showing the strain of living double lives in a world that no longer valued independent thought. The Aetheri aren't what they claim to be, James said, his voice hoarse from months of hiding. I've been studying their behavioral patterns, and they match textbook examples of systematic psychological manipulation. They create dependency by solving immediate problems while slowly removing the ability to question their methods. A woman Emma recognized as a former journalist spoke up. All independent media has been shut down. They say it's because truth is now provided directly by divine wisdom, so human interpretation is unnecessary. I've been trying to document changes in blessed individuals, but accessing them requires Aetheri approval. The economic system is another control mechanism, added a man who had been a financial analyst. They've eliminated money and replaced it with contribution credits based on how well each person serves their assigned role. But the assignments come from Aetheri algorithms that seem designed to prevent humans from developing expertise in any field that might threaten their control. Emma shared what she'd learned from her position overseeing the ceremonial guard. They're systematically dismantling every institution that could organize resistance. Military command structures, emergency services, even local governments are being replaced by Aetheri administrators who make all decisions based on divine guidance. The most disturbing information came from Dr. Park's research. I've been analyzing brain scans from volunteers who haven't been blessed yet. The Aetheri temples emit low-frequency radiation that affects human neural chemistry even without direct implantation. Extended exposure makes people more susceptible to suggestion and reduces their ability to form critical thoughts about Aetheri policies. So, just living near the temples makes humans more compliant? Emma asked. Exactly. And they've built temples in every population center on Earth. The entire species is being gradually conditioned to accept whatever the Aetheri tell them. Alex's voice crackled through their communication device from the Europa Station. I've detected something else in my analysis of the blessed humans. The implants aren't just changing behavior, they're collecting data. Every thought, every memory, every emotional response is being recorded and transmitted to Aetheri data centers. The implications hit Emma like a physical blow. They're not just controlling us, they're studying us. Like researchers examining lab animals, Alex confirmed. The question is what they plan to do with that information. Over the following weeks, the Resistance discovered evidence that made their worst fears seem optimistic. Hidden in old government archives that the Ethery hadn't yet digitized were radio intercepts from deep space missions that had been classified for decades. The signals were weak and fragmentary, but they told a story that chilled Emma's blood. Messages from human-type civilizations describing invasion by beings who called themselves gods. Pleas for help as their populations were transformed into willing servants. Final transmissions reporting the complete loss of independent thought. Among their people, the E3 have done this before, James said as they reviewed the evidence, multiple times, to multiple species. We're not their first project, then what happened to the others? Emma asked, though she dreaded the answer. Either they're still serving as perfected slaves somewhere in the galaxy, or they were disposed of when the Ethery found more interesting subjects to study. The Resistance realized they faced a choice between certain destruction if they acted and slow extinction if they remained passive. Emma looked around the circle of frightened but determined faces and made the decision that would define humanity's future. We need to wake people up before it's too late. Not just our supporters, but the entire species. The Ethery's greatest advantage is that most humans genuinely believe they're benevolent gods. How do we fight beings with technology that seems like magic? Someone asked. Emma smiled grimly, remembering her military training. The same way humans have always fought superior forces. We find their weakness and exploit it. Every enemy can be beaten if you understand what they truly fear. The perfect paradise the Ethery had created was about to face the one force they hadn't been able to eliminate completely: human stubbornness. The breakthrough came during a routine maintenance check on Europa, station's deep space communication array. Dr. Alex Reed was calibrating receivers when he detected an anomaly in the background radiation patterns. Hidden beneath layers of cosmic static was a signal that made his blood freeze. The transmission was definitely human in origin, using coding protocols that matched Earth's early space exploration programs. But the timestamp showed it had been broadcast 63 years ago from the Kepler system, decades before humanity had developed the technology to reach that far into space. Alex isolated the signal and spent 3 sleepless days cleaning up the distortion. What emerged was a desperate message from a research station orbiting Kepler 442b, a planet that Earth's astronomers had identified as potentially habitable. This is Commander Davis of the human colonial survey ship Prometheus. The voice crackled through static. If anyone receives this transmission, do not come to the Kepler system. They are not gods. I repeat, they are not gods. The beings that call themselves the Eternal Ones have taken our colony. Our people worship them now, but I've seen what they really are beneath their projections. The message dissolved into interference, but Alex had heard enough. Somehow, humans had reached Kepler decades earlier than official records indicated, and they had encountered beings very similar to the Ethery. Alex contacted the Resistance immediately. Emma's voice was tight with controlled excitement when she heard the recording. This proves the Ethery aren't unique. They're part of some kind of pattern, a system for conquering civilizations by pretending to be divine. There's more, Alex said. I've been analyzing the Ethery ships using the station's deep scan arrays. Their hulls show microscopic wear, patterns consistent with traveling between multiple star systems over thousands of years. They're not ancient gods from some distant realm. They're nomads who move from world to world. Dr. James Park's voice joined the conversation through their encrypted network. That matches psychological profiles I've been developing. The Ethery show behavioral patterns of a species that has practiced the same deception so many times it's become automatic. They're not improvising their approach to humanity, they're following a script. Emma had been coordinating intelligence gathering through her remaining contacts in what had once been Earth's military structure. I've found something that supports your theory. The E3 have been requesting detailed biological and psychological profiles of different human populations. They claim it's to optimize their blessing process, but the data they're collecting goes far beyond what would be needed for neural implants. They're studying us the way scientists study lab animals before. An experiment, Alex realized. Learning our weaknesses, our behavioral patterns, our social structures. The resistance spent weeks gathering evidence, but their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of Emma's former soldiers, Sergeant Tom Walsh, had been selected for an advanced blessing ceremony that would supposedly elevate him to serve as a direct interface between human and ethery command. Structures. Walsh had volunteered for the procedure, while secretly carrying a recording device that Dr. Park had hidden in his dental work. The device was designed to be undetectable by ethery scanning technology, and it captured something extraordinary. The ceremony took place in the deepest level of the New York Temple, far below the public areas where regular blessings occurred. Walsh was brought before High Divinity Luxon and several other ethery leaders for what they called a communion of minds. "Remove your projection fields," Luxon commanded in a voice that sounded nothing like his usual melodious tones. "The subject is unconscious. We can speak freely." The recording captured sounds of technology powering down, followed by voices that were harsh and guttural, nothing like the beautiful tones the ethery used in public. "This species is more resistant than projected," one voice said. "Neural adaptation rates are 30% below optimal. Many subjects retain subconscious rejection of the modification process." "The timeline may need adjustment," Luxon replied, his voice now carrying a wheeze that suggested respiratory problems. "How many of the marking group have shown signs of active resistance?" 47 individuals across all continents. The female military leader and the scientist on Europa Station represent the highest threat levels. They are building networks that could compromise the integration process if allowed to continue. Eliminate them after the next phase is complete. We cannot afford another failure like the incident with the Kepler colonists. Alex felt his hands shake as he processed the recording. The ethery had been discussing the humans who had somehow reached Kepler system decades earlier, and they had clearly failed to control that group completely. Emma's voice was steady, despite the danger they now knew they faced. "We need to see what they really look like. If they're using projection technology to appear godlike, their true forms might reveal weaknesses we can exploit." The plan was desperate but simple. Emma would use her security clearance to access the temple's lower levels during the next ceremony while Alex analyzed the ethery ships' energy patterns to find vulnerabilities in their projection systems. Emma's infiltration succeeded beyond their hopes. Hidden in maintenance areas beneath the temple, she witnessed another advanced blessing ceremony and recorded what she saw when the ethery dropped there. Disguises. The beings that had presented themselves as radiant gods were revealed as pale, emaciated creatures barely 5 feet tall. Their skin was gray and translucent, showing the network of veins beneath. They moved with the careful motions of beings whose bodies were failing, and their eyes held a desperate hunger that had nothing to do with divine wisdom. "They're dying," Emma reported to the resistance. "Whatever they really are, they're not the immortal gods they pretend to be. They look like they're barely surviving." Dr. Park analyzed the recordings with growing excitement. "This explains everything. They're not conquering civilizations out of benevolence or even malice. They're doing it out of necessity. They need something from other species to keep themselves alive." Alex made the final connection while studying energy readings from the ethery ships. The temples aren't just control centers. They're processing facilities. All that neural data they're collecting from blessed humans isn't being stored. It's being consumed somehow. "They're feeding on human consciousness," James said with horror. "The blessings aren't elevating people to divine status. They're preparing them to be harvested." The resistance faced a terrible realization. The ethery weren't gods or even traditional conquerors. They were parasites who had learned to farm civilizations for their mental energy. The perfect peace they offered was nothing more than the contentment of cattle being prepared for slaughter. Emma looked at the evidence they had gathered, and felt a cold determination settle in her chest. We need to wake up the entire species before the harvesting begins. But first, we need to know exactly what happened to the humans in the Kepler system. Alex was already working on that problem. Using the station's most powerful transmitters, he began broadcasting toward the Kepler system on the same frequencies the original colonists had used. If any humans had survived the Ethere's previous operation, they might still be monitoring those channels. The response came 3 days later, weak but unmistakable. A human voice transmitted across 43 light-years of space with a message. That changed everything. This is Commander Davis, still alive, still fighting. If you're receiving this, it means they've found Earth. Don't let them complete the harvest. We found a way to hurt them, but we were too few and too late. You still have time if you act fast. The transmission included technical data about Ethery weaknesses and the location of hidden human survivors who had been fighting a guerrilla war against their false gods for 6 decades. Emma smiled grimly as she studied the information. Humanity wasn't alone in this fight, and their enemies weren't invincible gods. They were just another species that had forgotten the most important rule in the galaxy. Never underestimate the fury of humans who discover they've been betrayed. The freighter carrying medical supplies to the Australian mining colonies made its final approach to Perth just as the sun set behind the city's crystal temples. Captain Emma Stone watched from the cargo hold as her team made last-minute preparations for Operation Lazarus. In 12 hours, they would either free humanity or die trying. Dr. James Park's breakthrough had come from analyzing the technical data transmitted by the Kepler survivors. The Ethery neural implants operated on a specific frequency that kept human consciousness suppressed. But the same frequency could be reversed, creating a countersignal that would shatter the artificial peace and restore independent thought to anyone within range. The challenge was power and coverage. Waking a few hundred people required equipment they could build in secret. Waking an entire continent demanded hijacking Australia's primary power grid and every communications satellite in the southern hemisphere. Alex Reed coordinated the technical aspects from Europa Station while Emma led the ground teams. They had spent months infiltrating key infrastructure points, placing equipment disguised as routine maintenance upgrades. The Ethery's confidence in their control had made them careless about monitoring human technical activities. Phase 1 targets are confirmed, Alex reported through their encrypted channel. Power stations in Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, and Darwin are ready. Satellite uplinks are in position. We'll have approximately 4 minutes between activation and Ethery response. 4 minutes to wake 12 million people from a dream that felt like paradise. Emma checked her watch. All teams report status. The responses came in sequence from hidden locations across the continent. Former soldiers, scientists, and ordinary citizens who had refused to accept that humanity's greatest achievement was learning to kneel before. False gods, Melbourne team ready. Sydney team in position. Darwin team standing by. Emma took a deep breath and spoke the words that would start a war. Operation Lazarus is active. All teams execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. Across Australia, human hands pulled switches and activated devices that had been carefully placed over months of preparation. Power stations redirected their entire output through modified transmission arrays. Communication satellites stopped, broadcasting entertainment programs, and began transmitting, a signal that cut through the Ethery's neural conditioning like a sword. Through silk, the effect was immediate and devastating. In Perth, Emma watched through binoculars as people collapsed in the streets, clutching their heads as suppressed memories flooded back. The blessed humans remembered who they had been before the neural implants turned them into willing slaves. A woman outside the nearest temple fell to her knees, but not in worship. She stared at her hands with growing horror as she realized she hadn't controlled her own actions for months. A man threw down the ceremonial robes he'd worn as a temple servant and began screaming questions that had been locked away in his mind. "It's working," Emma whispered. But her celebration died when she saw the Ethery response. The crystal temples began to pulse with angry red light as their alien builders realized they were under attack. High Divinity Luxon's voice boomed across the city through speakers that had been used to broadcast daily blessings. Children of Terra, you are experiencing a malfunction in your neural enhancement systems. Report to the nearest temple immediately for corrective treatment. Those who resist correction will be considered infected by a dangerous mental virus. But the awakened humans weren't listening anymore. Crowds began forming around the temples, and their voices carried a sound the ethery had never heard from their human subjects. Rage, Emma activated her communicator. Phase 2 now. Hit their projection systems before they can restore control. The second wave of the attack targeted the technology that made the ethery appear as divine beings. Alex had identified the projection generators hidden throughout each temple, and Emma's teams had prepared shaped charges, designed to destroy them without causing casualties among the human crowds. The explosions were small but precisely placed. As each generator died, the ethery lost another layer of their disguise. Some still appeared as the radiant beings humans expected, but others flickered between their false forms and glimpses of the pale, desperate creatures they really were. The psychological impact was everything Emma had hoped for. Humans who had worshipped the ethery as gods now saw them struggling to maintain their illusions. The spell of divine authority shattered like glass, but the ethery weren't helpless victims. As soon as they realized the scope of the rebellion, they abandoned their pretense of benevolent leadership entirely. Death squads emerged from hidden compartments in the crystal temples. Ethery soldiers in powered armor that amplified their frail bodies into killing machines. They moved through the crowds with weapons that turned human flesh to ash, targeting anyone who showed signs of resistance. Emma led her team in a desperate fighting retreat through Perth's industrial district as ethery aircraft filled the sky. Above them, the aliens' technology was far superior to anything humans possessed, but Emma had learned something important during her months of observation. The ethery fought like beings who had never faced serious resistance. Their tactics were designed for crowd control and intimidation, not warfare against opponents who understood their weaknesses. Target the joint seals on their armor, Emma shouted to her team as they took cover behind an overturned truck. The Kepler data showed they have to maintain internal atmosphere. Rupture the suits and they can't survive in Earth's environment. Her soldiers adapted quickly, using improvised weapons and knowledge of urban terrain to compensate for their technological disadvantage. A sniper named Roberts discovered that standard hunting ammunition could penetrate ethery faceplates if fired from close range. A former engineer called Martinez found that their aircraft were vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses generated by modified industrial equipment. The real battle wasn't just physical. Across Australia, awakened humans were spreading the word about what they had learned. The ethery weren't gods but parasites who fed on human consciousness. The temples weren't houses of worship but processing centers for a harvest that would destroy human civilization. Social media networks that had been dormant for months exploded with activity as people shared videos of the ethery's true forms and testimony from those who remembered what had been done to them. The awakening spread beyond Australia as humans around the world began to question why they had surrendered their freedom so easily. Dr. Park coordinated the information campaign from a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of Sydney University. The neural implants are failing globally, he reported. Even blessed humans outside our transmission range are starting to resist the conditioning. Seeing their neighbors wake up is triggering spontaneous recovery in others. But the ethery's response escalated with their desperation. High Divinity Luxon ships began orbital bombardment of Australian cities, turning neighborhoods into glass craters. His message to the world was clear: submit completely or watch humanity burn. This is what happens to species that reject divine guidance, Luxon announced through every remaining communication channel on Earth. The children of Terra will accept our love willingly, or they will be disciplined until they understand their place in our design. Emma watched Perth disappear in a pillar of fire and felt something break inside her chest. The Aethery weren't just conquering humanity. They were torturing it out of spite. Alex's voice crackled through the static of damaged communications equipment. Emma, I'm reading massive energy buildups in their fleet. They're preparing to activate something big? The final harvest, James realized with horror. If they can't control us anymore, they're going to drain every human consciousness on the planet at once. It will kill everyone, but they'll get enough mental energy to sustain themselves until they find another species to victimize. Emma looked around at her surviving team members, their faces illuminated by the glow of burning cities. They had awakened millions of people to the truth, but it might not be enough to save their species. How long do we have? Maybe 6 hours. Before the harvesting array is fully charged, Alex replied. Emma smiled grimly and checked her ammunition. 6 hours to destroy beings who commanded technology that seemed like magic. 6 hours to prove that humans could fight gods and win. Then we'd better get started. The stolen Aethery shuttle screamed through Earth's upper atmosphere as Captain Emma Stone fought to keep it stable. The alien controls responded to her thoughts rather than her hands, a disturbing reminder of how the false gods had designed their technology to merge with biological systems. Behind her, 12 human fighters prepared for what might be humanity's final gambit. Dr. Alex Reed had discovered the key to everything while analyzing the energy patterns of the Aethery fleet. The massive ships weren't just vessels, they were life support systems for a dying species. Every Aethery alive depended on the harvested consciousness of conquered civilizations to survive, and their flagship contained the central processing core that kept their entire race from extinction. The irony is perfect, Alex had explained. During their final briefing, they've made themselves completely dependent on the very species they've been enslaving. Destroy the core and every Aethery in the galaxy dies within hours. Emma had volunteered to lead the assault team because she understood something the others didn't. This wasn't just about saving humanity anymore. It was about ending a cycle of parasitism that had consumed dozens of civilizations across thousands of years. The shuttle's proximity alarm screamed as Aethery fighters moved to intercept them. Emma threw the craft into a spiraling dive that would have killed a human pilot. But the alien vessel's gravity compensation kept her team conscious. As they plunged toward the flagship's docking bay. Remember the plan, Emma shouted over the sound of energy weapons impacting their shields. We have maybe 10 minutes before they realize what we're really after. Get to the core chamber and plant the charges. If I don't make it out, detonate them anyway. The shuttle hit the flagship's landing bay like a meteorite, its hull glowing white-hot from atmospheric friction. Emma's team poured out of the wreckage into a space that hurt to look at directly. The Aethery architecture bent light and perspective in ways that made human eyes water and minds struggle to process what they were seeing, but Emma had trained for this. Dr. Park's research had identified the psychological techniques the Aethery used to disorient other species, and she'd spent weeks building immunity to their spatial distortion effects. She led her team through corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity. While keeping her focus on the objective, the first Aethery guards they encountered still wore their holographic disguises, appearing as radiant beings of impossible beauty. But Emma's team had seen the truth, and they fired their weapons without hesitation. The bullets tore through projection fields and into the pale, fragile bodies beneath. High Divinity Luxon's voice echoed through the ship as alarms began sounding. You cannot win, children of Terra. Even if you destroy this vessel, 1,000 others will take its place. Your species exists only because we allow it. Not for much longer, Emma muttered as she placed explosive charges on what her scanner identified as a critical power conduit. The Resistance had been working for months to prepare for this moment. While Emma's team fought their way toward the flagship's core, human forces across Earth were executing simultaneous strikes against every Aethery temple and control center. The aliens' overconfidence had made them vulnerable to coordinated attack. Dr. James Park led the assault on the New York temple. using knowledge gained from their captured E3 technology to disable the building's defensive systems. His team freed thousands of humans who had been held in stasis while their consciousness was slowly drained on Europa Station. Alex coordinated a different kind of attack. He had discovered that the E3 communication network operated on quantum frequencies that could be disrupted by precisely timed electromagnetic pulses. Every time he interfered with their signals, more human minds broke free from artificial conditioning. Emma's team reached the flagship's central chamber just as the harvesting process began. The room was vast beyond comprehension, filled with thousands of crystalline pods that pulsed with stolen human consciousness. At the center stood a structure that defied description, part machine and part living organism. Feeding on the mental energy of entire civilizations, High Divinity Luxon waited for them there, but he had abandoned his divine disguise entirely. The being that faced Emma was barely 4 feet tall, its gray skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame that looked ready to collapse. Tubes and wires connected him directly to the harvesting core, revealing the truth about E3 immortality. "You see us as we truly are," Luxon wheezed, his voice no longer carrying its hypnotic resonance. "We were once like you, proud and independent. But we chose survival over dignity, conquest over growth. We became parasites because it was easier than learning to evolve." Emma kept her weapon trained on him while her team placed charges around the core. "How many species have you destroyed?" 57 civilizations across 12,000 years. Each one believed they were special, that they could resist us or find some accommodation with our needs. They all knelt in the end. Humanity won't. Kneel. Luxon's laugh was bitter and filled with genuine sadness. "Your species is already dead, Captain Stone. Even if you destroy this ship, even if you kill every E3 in existence, the damage is done. Half your people carry our neural modifications? They will never be fully human again." Emma felt a moment of doubt as she considered the millions of humans who had accepted the E3's blessings. But then she remembered something Dr. Park had discovered during his research. "You're wrong," she said. "Human consciousness is more resilient than you understand. The modified humans are already recovering their independence. We adapt, we overcome, and we remember who we choose to be." The charges detonated before Luxon could respond. The harvesting core exploded in a cascade of energy that tore through the flagship's superstructure. Emma's team was thrown against the walls as the ship began to break apart around them, but the real victory was happening across Earth as every E3 simultaneously began to die. Without the constant flow of stolen consciousness from the core, they're artificially extended. Lives finally reached their natural end. In temples and command centers worldwide, the false gods collapsed as their bodies could no longer sustain themselves. Emma dragged herself to her feet as emergency lights bathed the ruined chamber in red. Luxon lay motionless beside the destroyed core, his face showing something that might have been relief. Around the galaxy, she knew that other E3 ships were going dark as their crews experienced the death they had postponed for millennia. The shuttle bay had been destroyed in the explosion, but Emma's team found escape pods that could reach Earth's surface. As they prepared to abandon the dying flagship, Alex's voice crackled through their communicators with news from the planet below. "The temples are shutting down. Blessed humans are waking up everywhere. It's working, Emma. The species is free." Emma looked back at the ruined core chamber one final time. Humanity had paid a terrible price for their freedom, and the scars would take generations to heal. But they had proven something important about themselves and their place in the galaxy. The escape pod fell toward Earth like a shooting star, carrying the last survivors of humanity's war against false gods. Below them, the planet turned in space as it always had, but now its people remembered what it meant to choose their own destiny. In the months that followed, human civilization slowly rebuilt itself. The E3 technology was studied and adapted, but always with safeguards to prevent another species from using it for domination. The neural modifications were gradually reversed, though some humans chose to keep certain enhancements that improved their quality of life without affecting their independence. Dr. Alex Reed established the first human deep space monitoring station, watching for other species that might be trapped under Ethereal-like control. Captain Emma Stone led the formation of Earth's first true interstellar navy, designed to protect not just humanity but any civilization that asked for help against parasitic conquerors. The most important change was in human philosophy itself. The experience of nearly losing their freedom to beings who claimed divine authority had taught them to question any leader who demanded worship instead of earning respect. They had learned that true gods don't need to make others kneel. Standing on the observation deck of humanity's first starship, Emma watched the stars and thought about the civilizations that might still be trapped under false divine rule. The Aetheri were gone, but the galaxy was vast and filled with other predators who might try to repeat their crimes. She smiled as Earth's liberation fleet prepared for departure. They carried a message that would spread from star to star, world to world, species to species. Gods could bleed, mortals could fight back, and freedom was always worth whatever price it demanded. Humanity had risen from their knees and would never kneel again.